Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It is Friday, April 26th. Thanks so much for joining me. We're going to have a regular type critique today. We're going to look back at the oldest poems in the queue. They date back to August 25th, so we'll try to catch up as much as we can and look through all those poems. Let's see who we've got here. We've got great posts all around. Winston Munn's here, Steve Harrell, Brian O'Sullivan, Morgan Feeney, Ruth Kennedy's here, Katie Dozier, Angel Heartlight, Monica Dobos, Sharon Ferrante. Who else do we have? Elizabeth Wolfe, I think I already said that. Nate Jacob is here, Nancy Sabanik, Lori Flanagan, James Langford, Gary Rosin. Good to see you all. Let's see, Monica Dobos, did I say that already? I don't know. It's getting to the repeating part of the thing, but Bree Steglis is here, Jamie Thomas, Chelsea McClellan, Sandra Fees. Yeah, great to see everybody. And as Deb T mentions, yeah, we are over 5,000 subscribers on our YouTube page. Thanks everybody who subscribed recently for putting us over that mark. It's like 5,025 or something at this point. Yeah, Mary Lisa is another poet, and Mary Lisa is awesome. Yes, Katie, correct. Factually accurate. I'm teaching I was working on right before this workshop I'm doing tomorrow for Writer's Digest, and it's the craft of publishing from the editor's perspective. And this is really what we do for the critique of the week. I realize people are paying for this workshop, which is an hour long, and yet we give it away every week for free right here on the critique of the week. So I'm glad you could join us. It's a lot of fun. As always, if you would like to submit poems for critique, all you have to do is submit them to our critique of the week category. We don't just pick poems at random. It's not like we're going to expose your poems to critique if you don't want to. But if you do, it's really great to have that workshop experience, to let people, to know what people actually think about your poems, what's working and what's not, where things are landing, what lines are clear, what's not accurate. Whatever we can do, please leave as many comments as you can in the chat windows. Mostly on YouTube. Again, we're really sticking to YouTube at this point. It's streaming live on both Facebook and Twitter, but we don't get a whole bunch of views anymore on Facebook. I mean, everybody just sort of migrated to YouTube, but we're streaming it there for the people who can help. I'll try to take a peek at other comments, but mostly we're just looking at YouTube. So if you have any comments, leave them, as many as you can, for these poems on the YouTube chat window, and I'll try to pass along as many as we can. But of course, the poets too can learn and look at the videos and read the comments themselves. All right, so let's take a look first at the oldest poem in the queue, which, once I said, this is Jennifer Watkins. The poem, she's from Colorado, and the poem was from last August 25th. And here it is, So Close, So Far. Were there any comments about it? Any journal questions? How many times can I submit? Well, I guess that is a good question. How many times and how often can you submit? I try to keep it to like once a year would be nice. I don't know. There's no real rule about it. But if we see it too much, maybe we'll start skipping people. And actually, there are some people who submit too much. So I guess, we'll know what too much is when we come to it. But try about once a year is probably good. But anyway, here is Jennifer's first poem. Did she include two? Nope, she just got one. So here is Jennifer's only poem, So Close, So Far. Let's take a peek. So close, so far. The extent to which time will stretch while you're away can't be measured by tape. Nor can it be walked, nor can it escape the reach of space. For the last time I placed my hand in yours and surrendered. For an instant you held me, reminding me how distant you'd be, how time would run away from us, and who's to say we'll remember each other. Come back someday, perhaps. I've held you like a thumbprint. Maybe it was real. I don't know yet. The year it takes me to unremember you. That if I see you again, your face will be one of a stunning stranger. So that is so close, so far. So there's some really nice lines in this poem, I have to say, first of all. But let's point them out as we go. See sort of what works and what doesn't. That's really the easiest way to go through a poem. It's called So Close, So Far. The title is a bit of a cliche. It's in quotes, though, which maybe is significant as someone is saying that. But not the most interesting title. That could be something that we find some more interesting way to go about. The extent to which time will stretch while you're away can't be measured by tape, nor can it be walked, nor can it escape. So we have the tape escape rhyme. There are nice sounds in this. Yeah. Jimmy Papa says, I like the thumbprint in the ending. Yeah, there's two lines that I think really stand out. But let's keep going. For the last time I placed in my hand in yours and surrendered for an instant, you held me, remembering how I'll do that again. For the last time I placed my hand in yours and surrendered. For an instant you held me, reminding me how distant you'd be, how time would run away from us, and who's to say we'll remember each other. Come back someday. Perhaps I've held you like a thumbprint. Maybe it was real, I don't know yet. The years it takes to unremember you, that if I see you again, your face will be one of a stunning stranger. Okay, so, is that what he said? Yeah, Sandra Fees points this out, and Jimmy Pappas. The thumbprint is really the line. Perhaps I've held you like a thumbprint. That's one of those lines that's so good, it could be, the heart of its own poem. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing where you're looking for the place in a poem, as you write, where your imagination really starts to take off, and you're starting to surprise yourself in saying something that you don't know that you knew, or you don't know what you're thinking about. Or an image pops up that's a symbolic thing that you can explain through metaphor, and then we get to a deeper point in the poem and the thought because of that. And so that line, I think, is perhaps I've held you like a thumbprint. I mean, that's the kind of line that is really memorable. It's hard, when I'm going through every day and picking like a quote from a poem to have, as the social media quote. A lot of times it's hard to actually find a quote that's a really good quote that works. And this is better than most quotes in most of the poems we have, I would say. It's a really great line. But the problem with the poem is that the rest of it isn't as vivid or nearly as vivid as that. And so, so instead of sort of diving into that metaphor, I've held you like a thumbprint. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was real. I don't know yet. And that we sort of jump back into the abstract rather than diving and pushing that metaphor farther. That's the kind of thing we can expand. Like, what is a thumbprint like? Talking about the grooves, that kind of thing. There's a whole opportunity, this whole like door that opens after that line to expand on that metaphor and make the poem interesting. But instead we just leave it there, hanging as one line. And if there was a lot of other stuff going on in the poem, that kind of thing is okay. But otherwise, most of the content is pretty sort of straightforward and not really substantial. As Jimmy Pampa says, before that it was too sentimental. But maybe that's the point. Katie Dozier says, Eric Campbell's poem today dives into exactly this as a vivid way with a bigger turn at the end that shows instead of tells. And so that's a great example. And why not pull that up? It is fun to pull poems up. And we'll take a look at today's poem by Eric Campbell, because that is fun. And it is a similar kind of feeling, too. So we'll pull this. Hang on one second. We'll pull this poem up by Eric Campbell. And this is In Case You Should Meet Me on the Street. And so when you read this poem, we'll look back at the original one more time and point out some things first. And then we'll look at the Eric Campbell poem. So here, the real images we get like count the images and count the places we experience a kind of scene that we can enter, a kind of feeling that we can have, that we can go in there and we can see things and touch things. There's concrete, tangible sort of objects around that you can really enter the poem with. Here we have, maybe it can't be measured by tape. So I'm imagining like a tape measure there. There's a walk, there's an escape, which are kind of vague. I don't know where to place those words. For the last time I placed my hand in yours and surrendered for an instant. So we have the you, but we don't know really who the you is. We don't have any sense of that actual person. We don't have any sense of the speaker. So these things are still floating kind of in space, reminding me how distant you'd be, how time would run away from us. So none of that is creating any kind of like scene, any kind of story we can enter. Then the one thing that does, perhaps I've held you like a thumbprint, that one great line, which is really, I think, the heart of this poem and the thing that needs to be expanded on. That's so vivid because you can, it's an unusual way to say, you don't usually think about holding a thumbprint, and there's so many connotations and so many, the way that imprinted on you, that it's everybody's unique, that it can't be removed, that kind of thing. There's so much like meat there, no pun intended, underneath the thumbprint. But then that's all we have. Maybe it was real. I don't know yet. So we're still sort of drifting, not doing anything specific. There's no scene being made, which is why if you focus on the thumbprint, you can build a scene around that. But look at Eric Campbell's poem now. In case you should meet me on the street. This is Eric Campbell. It's come to this. Since last February, I haven't touched you or anyone save for my mechanic, but that was by accident, and in March, and it was only a handshake because I forgot he could kill me without meaning to, and, besides, I've known him since junior high school. These days, I take a couple of aspirin every morning just for good luck. I go for one walk, sometimes two, daily, just for research's sake. Just to see, like some crystalline anthropologist from the future, if the present is like I imagine it or remember it from my incessant apartment. I won't come home. Sometimes I have to walk for miles, once a whole day, until I'm convinced I'm not some simulacrum. Please, dog, I've said aloud on walks, bite my leg, go for it, I need evidence. Part of some teenager's avatar on a campaign, wandering in the desert, banking on the biblical, that doing so leads to the promised land. Or at least some place worth selling or invading. So, should I meet you on the street after all of this, and if is over, and I hug you, I'll not only be doing so too hard, I will be trying to crush you before you can leave me again. And so compare that, the way that scenes are built so quickly, and how vivid they are, and how you're lost in the world of the poem that it creates. So it's come to this. Since last February, I haven't touched you or anyone save for the mechanic. So we don't know who the you is in the same way, and we never do. In the same way, with so close so far, we were never. The you's never revealed. The relationship's never really revealed. We don't really know who the speaker is. Just a lonely person. So there's an I and a you, a you who's missing or who's missed, and the I doing the missing and is lonely. But then we get, after that setup, we get save for my mechanic. And so you can really imagine vividly a mechanic is a real person, but that was by accident and in March, and it was only a handshake. So then you go to the handshake and you see shaking hands with a mechanic. Besides, I've known him since junior high school. So there's a whole backstory to this mechanic, and the handshake becomes a little more vivid. So we get this little tiny scene, which is just really a mechanic's hand in your hand. You can imagine the grease that goes from working on cars all day and that kind of, outfit the mechanics wear. There's a whole bunch of stuff that sort of spirals out of that one little image that we get. We get this whole little scene from that. All right, so these days I take a couple of aspirin every morning just for good luck. And so we see some aspirin. There's a very concrete detail. I go for one walk, sometimes two, daily, just for research's sake. So we're imagining the same person going for a walk. Just to see, like some crystalline anthropologist from the future, if the present is like I imagined it or remembered it from my incessant apartment. And so then, in the same way the handshake was modified, this walk that we're going on with the aspirin through the lonely streets is modified by being like an anthropologist from the future, which is a really interesting way to think about going for a walk, And so we have another little scene flowering up here, and then hoping for the dog to bite me. So you have that whole scene playing out in your head with just a few images, but you fill in the gaps with story, and we get to start building an actual thing in our head. And then it moves on to that same feeling with a turn at the end, back to the you, which we'd almost forgotten about. Like this almost feels like a COVID type poem. And it sort of is a COVID era, but it's almost a false lead. It's like a little rope-a-dope where we think it's about COVID, and then we're reminded of the you. And I hug you. I'll not only be doing so too hard, I'll be trying to crush you before you can leave me again. And then we realize again at the end that that it's all about this loss of a person. But there's so much vivid details, so many concrete details in that we get these two really distinct scenes, and then the third at the very end, and all of that becomes so much more powerful with the whole show don't tell type thing. So going back to the poem we were looking at, Too Close, Too Far, it's just devoid of those kind of images. It's that kind of scene. It's not like that kind of storytelling. And it would be so much more powerful if it does. That's why we say show don't tell. But there it is. So the one spot where the imagery got really concrete and flourished is here. So my advice, I think there's a great poem buried in that line. I mean, you're looking for the thing that your subconscious is trying to tell you, and the subconscious thinks in symbols and images, and not in words. And we're translating that subconscious impulse, those emotions and feelings that are inside of us. And it spoke to you here with this, I've held you like a thumbprint. And so my advice, I'd start like that. I've held you like a thumbprint. And then describe what it would, how it feels. Like start describing the thumb and the hand. There's a whole poem there that flowers out from that one word. If we recognize that and then dive in deeper, And so that would be my advice for this poem, to dive into concrete images like that. And the thumbprint is like the access point, or like the launch pad, you know, and we're launching into space after that from the thumb. Let's see. Yeah. Brian Sutherland says it was a brilliant choice of a poem to use as a comparison. Well, of course it was, because it was Katie Dozier's idea. Yeah. And Sandra Fee says this poem is great because it, talking about Eric's, because it keeps surprising us with these interesting images. And that's really the whole point of so much. I mean, there's a real story here. There's real images that you could conjure up in So Close, So Far. And so conjure them up, tell little stories like that, and let us feel the emotion by entering those stories. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next poem. That's my advice for that one. Next up, we have... this is Camille Newsom from Michigan. No questions. The poem is Dog and I. And there's two poems, or is it two forms? Nope, it's two separate poems, both called Dog and I, which is interesting. Okay, well, let's take a look at these. And I should say, there's a great point. Before we go on to this new poem, Morgan Phoenix says, I'm not sure if the critiqued poem is about Alzheimer's or somebody dying or what. And that's the thing, when we're abstract and generalize, we have trouble feeling the feeling of the poem because we don't know what the relationships actually are. Like with a poem, it's a kind of ventriloquism or something, where like the poet is playing us like a dummy or a puppet, you know, or like an actor. So we get to enter the poem and have that experience play out. But if we don't know what the relationships are, we can't feel, we can't be part of the story. So anyway, okay, but this is the next one. This is, again, Camille Newsom with Dog and I. Here's the first two poems with the same title. Dog and I. It's 100 degrees today. I feel bad for the man in a black suit and tactical boots. Yesterday we did surgery on a piglet. I sat at the kitchen table, stacked towels on my lap, a few spread on the floor to soak the blood, the piggy resting in my arms, intestines dangling down, brushing my thigh every few seconds. We tried to stuff the goobs back in, like a sleeping bag in a stiff stuff sack. Their oyster mushroom look, red wine color, the slippery as if covered in lube, ripe, oddly delicious looking. The farmers always say I describe the animal ailments with food adjectives, like the juicy vulva of a heifer who will give birth in a few days, or the meaty brain balls of Mr. Boar, or some crusty and foamy teats recently milked by a new calf. It's odd returning to the city at dark after a doozy of a day, prying open an abdominal sphincter on a spotted 3-week-old pig that in 9 months would occupy the door of my freezer in the form of brat patties and bacon. And now I walk the dog as if nothing important ever happens, which is arguable. I pray his intestines don't drag on cement as we pass the man viciously sweating in his suit. I know it's time to turn back home by the distance between dog's tongue and the sidewalk. 1 foot and we're okay to keep chugging. A few inches and he's ready for an ice cube and a nap. His limp is still there, but the CBD store is permanently closed according to Google Maps, and I just can't order more shit online today. So that's so talking about the visuals and the imagery and the way that builds a scene and how important it is to have concrete details. This poem is full of them, and feel how fun that is to read, how much of your imagination is opened up by having all these wonderful details in the poem. And that's really what the details do. Yeah, like as Rebecca Kate said, there's just so many great lines. James Edgar says lots of visuals, nice. So what can we do with this poem? I mean, this is really wonderfully, this is sort of passes the bar beyond which, most poems that come in have. This is already good enough to be considered closely for publication, really, because it's so vivid with so many interesting details and images and specificity, as everybody's saying. Bree Stiglitz loves the ending. So it's really great on that level of detail. Let's take a closer look and see Dog and I. It's 100 degrees today, so we get that later. Remember, this is sort of we get a callback to that because we're talking about it being so hot and taking the dog for a walk later. One of the things Monica Dobo says is, I wonder about the line length, though. And yeah, that's the thing. It feels a little arbitrary going back and forth. There's a sort of a shape to it, though, and I wonder if that's intentional. But yeah, so that's one of the things that a poem, um, that you can make the poem better with, just by having more of a sense of confidence. Like looking at the poem from a distance, I was surprised that the poem was as good as it is, given sort of the raggedness and inconsistency of of the poem's layout on the page. We haven't done it in a while, but we talked some, to go back again to Katie Dozier, who me and her were talking about this, and came up with this sort of concept that there's a plating in food, in fine dining. You have to plate the food in order to present it well, and it's important to plate a poem too, and present it in a way that's going to show that you cared and have people be excited about reading it in the same way that the care is shown by plating a gourmet meal. And then you can get excited about the presentation as well as the taste, and the whole becomes a whole experience, right? And so the poem could be better plated, first of all. So unless there's a reason for this, but I couldn't figure it out to me. Yeah. So Katie Dozier says, and this is sort of what I'm about to get at. Katie says, the extremely vivid images are not enough to make me feel this is a successful poem. While they are impressive, I don't feel it really goes somewhere. For me, when I'm asked to imagine, Elizabeth Wolf said, if it were mine, I would do it with and without line breaks to see if it felt like Flash or a prose poem, or if the line breaks added to it. Yeah. Winston Munn says, I think it goes somewhere, but is it far enough? And so this is the kind of poem where we have this sort of, which everybody does, I think, who edits a magazine. You have this sort of tiered way of reading, where the first reading, you don't even need to read. Like once I got a great image, like maybe this far in the poem, you wouldn't even bother. You're just like, oh, that's a poem I want to read closer. And you put it in the pile to read closer. We call them like maybes. Unless the poem fully engrosses you, and then engulfs you become merger of those. But once the poem does that, if you end up reading the whole thing, I put in a yes automatically. But a lot of times we put it in a maybe, and then you read the maybes later because you want to spend more time and have more focused attention. And it gets to that line. But then once it gets to that line, the question is really, does this do enough? Does it go far enough? Is it going to be memorable? Is it rewarding enough? The payoff? Is it transformative enough? And after the surface of great images, what's the reward? What do I take away from it is the question. And so because this poem raises to that bar where the language is wonderful, then the question becomes that, which is like the next step up. So let's take a look at it and see how it feels reading it one more time. Dog and I. And we might read a poem like many, many times trying to decide. That's sort of when there's gray area cases, you're trying to decide on a poem. It ends up being like at our editorial meetings, like me and Alan and Katie sometimes sitting around the table, talking about poems. You'll read the poems over and over again, and kind of debating whether or not it went far enough or it's memorable in that way too. Let's read again. So it's 100 degrees today. I feel bad for the man in a black suit and tactical boots. Yesterday we did surgery on a piglet. I sat at the kitchen table, stacked towels on my lap, a few spread on the floor to soak the blood, the piggy resting in my arms, intestines dangling down, brushing my thigh every few seconds. So to me, just reading that first part and to talk about the idea Elizabeth Wolf had of putting it into a prose poem, I think the sounds are good enough that you want the pacing of line breaks. Because what line breaks really do is guide the reading experience. So they're like a pace car for the reading experience. They tell you sort of how fast to go and where to slow down and things like that. And if there's a prose poem, can have great imagery, but if you don't get to experience the joy of the sounds as much as that. And so to me, I think that this does want line breaks. To me, I wonder if we maybe want to keep the lines at sort of a consistent length at this length and break it. If we did surgery on a piglet, that seems like a good line. And then I sat at the kitchen table, stacked towels in my lap. I think we could get the poem like this length. And it would feel much cleaner, and we'd be able to enjoy the sounds a little more. So to me, that's what I would do. I would get a consistent line length out of this, unless somebody has any suggestion for why, what purpose this is serving. But I really don't. That the lines extend this far, and even in Rattle, I think, if we were printing this poem, a line like this would be artificially broken around the farmers. That's as big as the page goes. It's like 36 characters or something, and then there's no more room. so to me, I would find the length and try to make the lines consistent, because the poem feels better. It's plated better that way. And now everybody else is talking about, where was it? So, yeah, somebody was saying, Jimmy Papa says surgery seems like the wrong word, and there was some confusion about, was it Morgan Feeney? A little more editing. The details in anatomy make me think that the narrator is a vet, but that doesn't seem consistent with surgery in a kitchen. Maybe a very rural vet? I don't know. And yet, it's a little unclear. And I wonder if maybe the title could make that clear, so we don't have to be left wondering. Because Dog and I isn't as especially great title. So I'm imagining it's a vet. So maybe we can set the scene a little bit and clear up that by having a title that explains that it's a vet the day after doing this or whatever. Anyway, let's look a little more closely. So we tried, where were we? Yeah, dangling down, brushing my thigh every few seconds. We tried to stuff the goobs back in like a sleeping bag stuffed in a sack. See, these are just great lines and really vivid. It feels like you'd have to actually be a vet or a butcher, as someone else said. We're not exactly sure to understand this. We tried to stuff the goobs back in like a sleeping bag in a stuffed sack. The oyster mushroom look, red wine color, and slippery as if covered in lube, ripe, oddly delicious looking. Here we repeated the look twice, which I wouldn't do that. Delicious looking, I'd cut the look, oddly delicious. The farmers always say I describe the animal ailments with food adjectives. And so, see, to me, I thought it was a vet that was going from like farm to farm. And I think that's the explanation. Yeah, it's Brian O'Sullivan just said that at the exact same time as I did. The line that starts the farmers always say. Yeah, so I think it's someone going out into the country to do, veterinary work on farms. Like the juicy vulva of a heifer who will give birth in a few days, or the meaty brain balls of Mr. Boar, or some crusty and foamy teats recently milked by a new calf. It's odd returning to the city at dark after a doozy of a day. Great sounds there too. Returning to the city after dark, after a doozy of a day. It's just enough repetition of sound and alliteration to be really musical, but not too much to be annoying. So it's a great balance there of sound. Prying open an abdominal sphincter on a spotted 3-week-old pig that in 9 months, I think this is a typo, it should be will occupy the door of my freezer. And that's why, because it's a farm and the pigs are going to be slaughtered eventually. So I think that's, a thought you would have as you're working on this pig. Like you're saving it so that you can eat it later. So that's interesting too. Now I walk the dog as if nothing important ever happens, which is arguable. I pray his intestines don't drag on cement as we pass the man viciously sweating in his suit. I know it's time to turn back home by the distance between dog's tongue and the sidewalk. 1 foot and we're okay to keep chugging a few inches and he's ready for an ice cube and a nap. His limp is still there, but the CBD store is permanently closed according to Google Maps, and I just can't order more shit online today. And so for me, I love the poem. I think this is pretty much what Katie Dozier had said too. I love the poem for the details and how much of it is seen, and I just want to know more about this world, which is interesting and vivid and unusual. But then the end, I know I love the insight about the dog's tongue, and so I'm really on board. Chugging a few inches away, he's ready for an ice cube and a nap. But then we go to his limp is still there, but the CBD store is permanently closed according to Google Maps. And to this, the ending to me just doesn't work. Like it isn't enough of a turn or a leap or surprising. Like it didn't justify, all the stuff that we already read having been written. It's still a poem looking for its ending, I think. And there's a movie. We were watching a movie recently. Maybe Katie remembers. But it was with Nicolas Cage, and it was like this weird, surreal movie. And everybody was dreaming about him, the main character. They're just sort of a nerdy professor. And everybody in town started dreaming about him, which was weird. And it's sort of, you can imagine where it goes from there. But it was clear by the end of the movie that the people who wrote and directed it didn't know where to go at the end. And the ending was just this sort of mess that didn't go anywhere. And poems feel like that all the time. Like you have this great setup and this great story built, but then you have to have some kind of destination that means something. And this hasn't found it yet. And so for me, I would say, cut this off here and try to find a different ending. One of the things I like to do, if I have trouble with that, if I get in a poem in this situation, is to start, I type out the poem completely from scratch, and then up to the point where I'm confused. And then I try to feel what sound you want next, and then sort of iterate, just make up stuff to see where your mind can leap to after this point of the nap. And if it can leap somewhere, let me do another example poem, because it is fun to do examples. Let's see. I'm trying to look at a short... So one of the poems I love, this is Living the Chemical Life by Chris Anderson. It's a shorter poem, but we can see how the leaps work. We can see how the leaps work in this. And he's a great poet. But we'll read this and see how... Imagine... Well, I'll read the poem, I'll stop. Okay, it's one point. And then we'll imagine what endings could be without showing it, if that's possible. We'll try it. So this is Living the Chemical Life. I have to admit that I don't care about the historical Jesus, one way or the other. I've always thought there were larger forces at work, the sun and the wind, the sadness that comes in the afternoon. Do you know that our bones are only 10 years old? No matter how old we are, it's always the same. Something to do with cells, I guess, with regeneration. Sorry, I have to fix this. With regeneration. Something to do with cells, I guess, with regeneration. There are miracles like this all over the place, in everybody's bloodstream, and that's all right with me. Doris Day was once marooned on an island with another man. Years went by, and her husband, James Garner, was about to marry another woman, Polly Bergen. But then Doris came back and sang a lullaby to her kids, then tucked them into bed, and they didn't even know who she was. I think life is just like this. So imagine the poem ended there. That's kind of the spot where we are with this poem, the poem we're looking at, is that we haven't quite found the ending. Like, we have this nice setup, we had some leaps and some surprises and interesting ways the story was told, but then what do we do with that? So a lot of times what I would do is, I would, type out the ending of the poem, maybe, and they didn't even know who she was. Life is just like this, blah, 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 and I'd say something. And I'd go to the next page or make a page break and then do it again, just over and over again, kind of iterating, imagining, like letting yourself not be self-conscious about what comes out next. And I think eventually when you do that, you find the leap. You find something surprising, the thing that your subconscious is trying to tell you. You leap into that last line, whatever it is, what the whole point of what your poem was really about. And so this poem, Living the Chemical Life, was talking about Jesus, the coming back, the idea of resurrection, and what that means on a deeper level. But you could see he didn't get to the end yet. And then here is what it is. So he says, and they didn't even know who she was. I think that life is just like this. Sometimes we're the stone and the spirit is the river. Sometimes we're the mountain and the spirit is the rain. And so imagine that poem without those last two lines. This wasn't even the poem I meant to pull up. I got too confused, but it works in the same way. You need those last endings, which is sort of, a leap to something different and surprising. And you can come up with that just by letting your mind wander. When you're lying in bed at night and you're sort of daydreaming or, falling asleep, and it's like a daydream because you're kind of thinking and you're kind of awake, but you start to realize that you're not really in control of your thoughts. And that's sort of the process of falling asleep and dreaming. Well, you can get into that process while writing a poem and then letting yourself be surprised, letting the mind take the wheel, or Jesus take the wheel, no pun intended. And then let something surprising come out of the poem. And that's what I would do with this. I think the poem is great. I would work on the line breaks, like I said, and make it more consistent. And then at the end, just find an ending that works for the poem. Let's see. Yeah, because there is something. In the same way that with the Chris Anderson poem, there was something that was sort of gnawing at him about the Jesus story and how it might relate to that movie scene. And you can see him, sort of digging in there and then coming to this conclusion. As ambiguous and strange as it is, that feels complete, like we've gone somewhere. It's transformed us into something surprising. And, yeah. Well, anyway, so I think that's what to do with that poem. It's really, really great writing, though. Let's read the other one. Interestingly enough, The other one, like I said, is also called Dog and I. So maybe this is a manuscript of all poems called Dog and I, and maybe we don't have, there's something interesting about doing that. There are I've read a few books like that. I'm trying to think of any off the top of what they actually are, but I've seen a few that do this, where it's the same title every time. And that's interesting in a manuscript. You lose an opportunity, but sometimes it can be worth doing that. So maybe that's the case here. Dog and I. But let's see how this relates. Dog and I. Well, maybe I should talk about, because everybody's talking about the sexual images in this poem and how they sort of don't quite fit. I mean, there were. Let me read. So let's see. So it was Katie who said, to be honest, I don't know if a poem can leap far enough to make me glad to have imagined those specific images, particularly with the sexualization of the cow. Then Chelsea McClellan says, I could see some of the other images working, but agree about the sexualizing images. Just doesn't fit for me either. And then Katie says, but the images could be tweaked if that was intended connotation of some of the adjectives. Well, that's interesting. I think, I don't know. I'm kind of split about that myself. Drya Montilido says this, and I think this is really the heart of the poem and what we want to get to at the ending too. Drya Montilido says, there's a moment of empathy that breaks through just the shock and gore. So the images are laying themselves out in a way that's sort of shocking and a little gory and a little blunt and a little traumatic, And so Drya Montilido says, there's a moment of empathy that breaks through just shock and gore and imagining patience as food. It's how caring about someone, dog, changes how you see others, pig. And then continues, the vet can professionalize and compartmentalize the gore when it's just a pig he only knows as a patient, but his relationship with dog breaks that protective wall, and he needs to dull that. So there are two more things, and I think that is at the heart of what the poem is really about, and we need some kind of conclusion to get to that point. And then two, let's see. Morgan Freeney says, I can guess not in the morning, but I didn't read that as sexual, just medical. And I think that was what, to me, what was being gone for in the poem was this sort of clinicalization of everything. So it doesn't seem gory or sexual to me. These are just parts, because I'm a vet and this is what I do all day. And it's a strange way to be. And then somehow having the relationship with the dog, makes you rethink that whole detachment while you're at work, And so it might be a little too far in that direction, but maybe tone it down a little bit because some people have that reaction to the connotations of those words. Anyway, let's read the next poem now. And again, it's called Dog and I Too. There is half a plastic mannequin, just legs on the porch next door, spray painted gold, and a devastating jack-o'-lantern, droopy on the verge of mold, staring at leggy lady's crotch. We walk by, Dog and I. Dog perks his tail, then fluffs his ears to investigate. We continue. The consignment store is growing charred, but no one is out harvesting the stems, pink and orange, like Fanta and Bazooka. Maybe Dog and I will return tonight. The new home collective store is empty, except for cheap confetti scattered on the floor, like the thoughts of my patients last night at work, vivid and all over the place. Now the local barista stares at me through the front window. They must be bored. It's that time of day where you don't want to get caffeinated coffee because you'll be up all night and you don't want to be made fun of for ordering decaf so early in the day. Two small white dogs bark at the frame shop, maybe asking to be subjects of a future still life. Dog and I turn the corner to head home, past the elementary school and the gallery. The alleyways littered with overflowing trash cans, youths dropping bags of bruised apples, and the couple walking a dog, telling everyone they are lonely. Yeah. Okay, so for this one I didn't get into it as vividly as the other poem, but again, it's a nice voice. And a lot of details. I mean, it's just not as heightened as in the last poem, but still good use of voice and image to create scenes. So there's half a plastic mannequin, just legs, on the porch next door, spray-painted gold, and a devastating jack-o'-lantern droopy on the verge of mold staring at the leg lady's crotch. So really great. I mean, that's a vivid opening scene right there. So this seems to be a series of poems about walking dogs. Brandon Sutherland says, I like this person for naming their dog Dog. We walk by, Dog and I. Dog perks his tail, then fluffs his ears to investigate. We continue. The consignment store is growing charred, but no one is out harvesting the stems, pink and orange like Fanta and Bazooka. Maybe Dog and I will return tonight. So as vivid and interesting as this first stanza was, I start to fade and get less interested in this walk as the poem goes on. The new home collective store is empty except for cheap confetti scattered on the floor like the thoughts of my parents last night at work. Vivid and all over the place. I like that image. That's great. So this is a good one. I think for me, this one isn't as vivid, and there's no real point to it either. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's this point. Everybody here, you're such veterans. You guys all say exactly what I'm saying too. Monica Doba says the second stanza is not as interesting. Exactly. Now the local barista stares at me through the front window. They must be bored. I think this should be. She must, or well, I don't know, maybe not. It's that time of day where you don't want to get caffeinated coffee because you'll be up all night, and you don't want to be made fun of for ordering decaf so early in the day. So that's an interesting observation. Two small white dogs bark at the frame shop, maybe asking to be subjects of a future still life. I like that too. Dog and I turn the corner, head home past the elementary school and the gallery. And again, here, I feel like this is the spot. The endings just sort of, as somebody said, drift out. I'm trying to find the actual comment. I don't know. I lost it. Somebody said that, though. The endings kind of drift off. And that's how I felt, too. If when you get to this spot, like, I'm excited for the poem to go somewhere. And then, I find at the end that the poem actually really hasn't gone anywhere. And that ends up being a kind of disappointment. So we push through the last stanza. The alley's littered with overflowing trash cans, the youth dropping bags of bruised apples, and the couple walking a dog, telling nearly everyone they're lonely. I like that on its own. But how does that add up? Like, how does that become the culmination of what's appeared before? I don't know. I mean, to me, it doesn't... Like, the endings don't sort of, hit home as much as you expect them to be. Yeah, James Langever says the ending leaves me hanging. And there's a good way to be left hanging, where you don't know exactly what to make of it. Santa Fe says the speaker in both poems seems to be processing work while walking their dog and observing other people's lives. Sidney Guntherman says I like the second one better. I like the details better than the graphic body parts. Brandon Sullivan, if the dog does have a bunch of poems about dog, I wonder if they work better together as a chapbook. I know that's not great if you want to publish these individually. And that's a problem. Yeah, we had... Like, there's one book, the one I always think about... what is it? I like to say the actual book. I remember... were they about? Maybe it wasn't. Yeah, I can't remember who this was. I was thinking about it was a book of poems all about Kanye West, like a long time ago. Maybe somebody can remember who the poet was or what I'm thinking of. Oh yeah, here it is. It is Kanye West. So it's Mr. West by Sarah Blake. And I remember, you can see, I'll put this on screen really quick. This is from Amazon, but Mr. West by Sarah Blake. And she kept submitting these poems to Rattle, actually. And they were great poems. But out of context of a whole book, they just, like, sort of hung in a way that they didn't really add in a single poem, where you're just reading one poem at one time, or even if it's a few, without the context and the feeling of a whole book. Like, I could just tell it was great as a whole book, but nothing was like individual enough that it would fit for us. It's one of the most stark examples of that, because Mr. West came out as a book, and it was a great book from the Wesleyan poetry series, and this kind of feels like the same type of thing. So it's a really interesting comment that Brian said that maybe it would make a great chapbook. And that's kind of thing. If it were these like plot points during the course of a book about the dog and I and what happens after work, and that is where the arc was contained, it could work really well. But then publishing the poems individually becomes really difficult. And maybe that's the situation these are in. And if you have it as a series of poems like that, you might not want like a real ending that like hits hard home because it's a part of a plot point that you're moving through a progression. And so it's just the nature of, some poems are less worth made for publishing in a magazine versus publishing in a book later. And so that can be an issue too. And, poets who have sort of project books and longer narratives always have trouble with that. So that could be it. But to me, I mean, the poems all paint great scenes and then sort of peter out by the end. And I think having some kind of, conclusion, just doing all the things I talked about before, is the direction to go with that. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. There was a lot of talk about that. They're good poems, but let's move on. And we got to go a lot faster. Last time I did a great job, but when the poems are good, they're worth talking about more. But we only got into 2 poets so far, and I want to do like 6 in the hour. So we really have to pick up the pace here. And so this next one is from Moonzar from Lahore. And Moon says, "Hi, most people tell me my poetry is too complicated for them to understand, and they're not able to catch up on the meaning quickly. I wonder why is that?" So let's take a look at these poems. Are they too complicated? Let's see. And where's Lahore? Is that in... Oh, Pakistan. That's right. In Pakistan. Okay. Hymn of Love. Even birds are frightened by the hymn of love, as if the hymn of death. The poets in their poetry decipher love as if it's a devotion to a lifelong misery. And what an unloved child will hold on to. Anything other than love is numb to them, because love to them is a sickening rage. And hold on to the idea of love, Dorothy, you'll give your all, and he'll take it, and when you open your eyes and he closes his, everything is left to him and nothing to you. The tears now rush down the cheeks that used to blush. Love, love, what meaning this age will give to this old forgotten word. So it was the hymn of love. And so to me, I think, talking about that decipherability in poems, it's really important, I think, to think about the aspect of you're taking someone's time with a poem and how that time has to be worthwhile. If the poem has something of something to give, then a poem can be difficult to decipher and still work. If it's really musical, then it's just fun to say out loud, and it has interesting images. A poem can do that and be difficult to decipher, and still work. And so at the beginning of reading this poem, I was thinking that it might be like that, because even birds are frightened by the hymn of love, as if it's the hymn of death. I think that's a great opening that could go somewhere, where even if I don't quite, understand or in a way that I can articulate what the poem's about, it's still enjoyable and memorable because of the sounds and the way it makes you think, and the sort of strange ambivalent feelings at the end that you get from those kind of poems that like you can't quite connect, but you feel like there's a connection there. There's great poems like that all over the place. But the poem doesn't keep on that pace. The poets in their poetry decipher love as if it's a devotion to a lifelong misery. And what an unloved child will behold onto. I mean, the syntax of that's confusing. I don't know. I don't really follow it. What an unloved child will behold onto. I don't know. So that tripped me up, and there's not a lot of there's a beauty in this. To even birds are frightened by the hymn of love, as if it's the hymn of death. And so we have that repetition. There's the music there. There's that sound of birds, which sort of stands out really starkly. There's really nice sounds in these first 2 lines. And something that's interesting too. And then the second, they don't have the same sort of musicality as the first 2 lines. And they're a little harder and they're a little more abstract, I guess you could say. Anything other than love is numb to them, because love to them is a sickening rage. So sickening rage kind of, not only is it abstract and generalized, but it a little bit trippy to say, sickening rage, and hold on to this idea of love. So we get so abstract that the, what's compelling about the poem, we lose that aspect of it. And Senator Guntherman is saying, I like the first line, but don't follow the rest. And exactly. And if the thing is, though, that I want to say, though, is that if the whole poem ran through as musically as this, and stayed sort of on that level of, I don't really know exactly what it's about, but I can feel something there, then it works. But if the poem doesn't keep that up, then it doesn't work to not really understand what's going on. And then I like the introduction of Dorothy. Or Dorothy? Do you say Dorothy or Dorothea for that? I guess Dorothea. Dorothea, you'll give your all, and he'll take it, and when you open your eyes, and he closes his, everything is left to him and nothing to you. Yeah, so it's, so Nigama says, why a sickening rage? Yeah, I just don't really follow it, and I guess the problem is I'm not interested enough to care to follow it. So, keeping that up is what's important. Winston Munn says everything is left to him seems to be to thrust of this poem. Yeah, and as Katie Dozier says, I think, and I would say the same thing, I think a lot of times people say a poem is too complicated, they mean that the poem is lacking an entry or too vague. And that's really the case. I mean, and so how can you, think of voice, and how do you keep the poem going in this voice? Like, what would someone who said this, what is the next thing they would say? But we don't really know what it's about. Winston Munn says, perhaps trying too hard to be substantive. Yeah. So we don't really know what it's about, and it's too much, and we don't. Ruth Kennedy says, I don't see the word love as a forgotten word, so I wonder what the poet's getting at in the last line. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at the other poem too. We'll see if it has similar issues. Death of Hope, and so again we have this abstraction. Where do you go with dying hope in your hands? When enclosed walls exhibit the words you endure with bloodshot eyes, the moonshine, your mournful heart unveils itself with your smile. When you don't belong to a tyrannical world but dreamers liberating their minds, where do you go with the death of hope in your hands? To the grave, to hell, towards a prolonging nothingness. So again, the poem, it's very vague and doesn't really convey a whole lot. And, having images, scenes, characters, a distinct voice, concrete images. Look back at that very first discussion with Eric Campbell's poem. Look back at Chris Anderson's poem. The way that those create stories using images and things feel specific and real. Like, we want something to feel real. That's why concrete images matter. Because concrete images feel real. Like, they become so vivid that you can touch them and then you enter the poem. And we're not doing that. So too vague. Katie Durr says this is a great example of how reading more poetry helps us understand the specifics that make poems memorable and meaningful. Yeah, exactly. And Dick Westhammer says, and besides the first line, there is nothing approaching metaphor. Cindy Gutman says too vague. And it's just, it's hiding behind vagueness instead of saying something. So actually tell stories. Tell who we're talking about. Let us paint some kind of scene. Go to images. Go to storytelling. And that'll make people appreciate the poems more. Okay, let's go to another poet. Next up we have Ivan Edwin. And this is up to September 16th from Patna, India. So Dreams, the title's here. It's written into the general questions line, but let's see. I think the poem's called Dreams. First, we can't publish emojis. They're like sort of proprietary for certain things, and also we don't do color in print and a lot of stuff like that. So That's the first thing off the bat, but we'll see what's done with this poem. In the quiet corners of my mind, they dance these dreams of mine. Unfettered, unfeathered, they take flight in the depth of night, each a whisper of what could be, a glimpse of a reality unseen. In the realm of sleep, they reign supreme, these kings and queens of dream. So this is a very nursery rhyme-ish type poem in a way that can work, actually, I'd say. It's not the kind of poetry that's printed in rattle necessarily, but poems that make great children's books and stories and things like that. So keep that in mind. They paint a world in hues of hope, a canvas vast and clean, where love blooms free and joys run wild, a sight seldom seen. They speak in tongues of courage and faith, in a language so serene. In the silence of the night they echo these dreams of mine unseen. So I think there's really nice rhythm and meter. And the rhymes used nicely in this poem too. A brighter version of Edgar Allan Poe type poem. That sort of ornateness and regularity. One of the things, though, if you look at a poet like Dr. Seuss or Shel Silverstein, they'll still have all the concrete images. They'll still have story development in their poems. And again, that's missing from this poem so far in the first two stanzas. It's pretty long. I think we'll leave it there because you can see that the poem, repeats a lot and goes through that. And what we really need, we can look back at the earlier stuff we already talked about, concrete images, actual stories emerging so our imaginations can blossom. Okay? Let's go to the next poem. We're really moving along fast right now. And next up, we have Spiritual Prison Ink. And this poet is Christopher Dara from Mechanicsville, Pennsylvania. Spiritual Prison Ink. There we go. Spiritual Prison Ink. My tattoos are on the inside, interior spiritual lacerations, now being described to the world slowly, a line at a time. Gray matter, landscape, navigation, traversing, traversing chasms of denial, regret, wasted time, and misspent energy. Flip memory rocks, allow fear to clear. Honest viewpoint inside the rusty barbed wire duality. It no longer serves to protect me. Made a deal with the goddess. Cover them back before they kill me. Relief from the misery if I don't add more to the self-portrait nocturne. So for this, again, we don't get the storytelling in the concrete images. Again, my tattoos are on the inside, interior spiritual lacerations. So the difference between describing what the actual tattoos look like and calling them interior spiritual lacerations, which, that is a descriptor category, kind of, with adjectives that don't have, any kind of concrete imagery. Like show, it's always that. It's always make scenes, make the imagination blossom. And so being vague and abstract and using categorical type words, adjectives that are generalized, they don't make the poem vivid enough to engage our imagination. So, now being described to the world slowly, line at a time. So describe them. I want to see them. If they're actually, tattoos, on the inside, like, what do they look like? Not traversing chasms of denial, which I can't see. I don't know what that would be, really. Regret, wasted time, misspent energy, like categories. We're talking in categories. Flip memory rocks, allow fear to clear. Honest viewpoint inside the rusty barbed wire duality. And so, the barbed wire is a little bit concrete, but where is it and what's it doing? Cover them black before they kill me. And why would they kill you? So it raises a lot of questions and doesn't dig into the answers. But as Dry Montellado says, I like the idea of tattoos on the inside. And I do. I think that's a great leaping off point. But start by describing and going there. Make us enter, make a story, make a little magic space that we can enter. Okay. Let's do one more, at least. And then we get to 6, which is the goal of one of these ones. Winston Munn says, for the last one, I think this is a good point. This poem isn't really telling me anything that made me glad I read it. And yeah, what we would want to do with a poem like that is, experience how you experience that. And then, let us have that experience. Let us feel the pain that you feel or whatever it is by allowing us to enter yourself, and that's why the concrete images and stuff are so important. Okay, next we have Matt M, and this is from Belgrade. Teen Poet is the title, I guess. Going Down in Flames Tonight might also be the title. That was the title of the document, so we'll see what it's actually called. Another very short poem. Silence was ineffable, so I broke it with a scream. You can be my light, for I have never been seen. You can be my lie if you play it right. Baby, you pour the gasoline. I'll bring the matches. Not ashamed to say I'm going down in flames tonight. So again, very vague, categorical descriptions rather than concrete details. The gasoline is an interesting, that's a specific detail, but then it goes to gasoline with matches, which is kind of a cliche. We really, again, watch the, watch the beginning of this episode, read more poems that are successful, and feel like, Katie Doder says feels like insta poetry. And that's the thing, what interests insta poetry, it's a good observation. Insta poetry tries to be vague so you can use poems, like greeting cards. And they're not really used to learn something new or, create new memories or experiences or understand things, new connections, to grow your consciousness is what we're trying to do with poetry. They're made to be secret messages between people, kind of, and you post it on your timeline, and then that shows somebody. It's sort of like subtweeting, is what Instagram poems are kind of like, and there's a use for that. It's just not nobody's going to get anything out of it reading it in a book. And if you want to have it in a book, that somebody's going to read and grow and become a different, more interesting person from having read your poems, they have to have, storytelling and details and things like that. Yeah, Chelsea McClellan says, I'm thinking of the thing Tim says all the time about a lot of these poems avoiding getting to the real story, perhaps because the author is avoiding the pain of it himself. And yeah, that's a great point, and that really is it. It's, being vague is a way to sort of, pretend to be addressing what you feel compelled to address, but without really actually addressing it. And Nate Jacob says, ineffable is poetry's worst words. Say nothing by saying there's nothing to say. Okay. Well, anyway, so specificity, we want to know who you are, who, what, why, where, when, how, paint a story, make it concrete. Let's do one more poem. And again, I'm being short because, if you watch the whole episode, you get a lot more detail because we've talked about this already, because this is the main thing. This is what you get with submissions. Okay, let's take another look. And next we have Javani Ramirez from Merced, California. No questions, 2 poems. Well, let's see. We'll see if it's the same type thing or not. Disappointment. You. The finger is pointed at you by the person you love the most, shaking their head while they speak, displaying actions, causing your mind to shrink, confused if they are either sad or mad, saying what you've done is beyond bad. What is this new feeling and why does it sting? Like if you were whipped by a lasso of spines, ripping apart your flesh, causing you to bleed. Why does this new feeling hurt so much? So again, I'm just going to go back to the original stuff. Tell a story, paint a scene, show us. It's a storytelling is what's missing from so many poems. It doesn't have to be long novelistic descriptions of scenes and who's doing what and things like that. Look at those first poems we showed, how small details let a story blossom, where we know where we are, who's doing it. The generalities just don't work. They don't move anybody. And Deb T just said generalities. That kind of thing just doesn't really work. So anyway, let's take a look at the other one. A dream of you. Billions of people live on this earth, but spending time with you feels like there's no one else. For the days feel longer, like nights in the summer, where the sun lasts forever and the children play wherever. So again, show us the children playing, show us what those nights actually look like, what happens, make that a whole scene. Even with a few details, you can make a whole scene. And then our minds, we start to enter the feeling, we start to feel like the speaker is us. Like we enter, in that magic way that you enter a poem, but you have to have something to it. We could sit for hours with no words being pronounced. The silence doesn't bother me, for the night as well is quite, but it still manages to be so vibrant. Knowing the light of life you shine upon me surrounds me with joy that I have been looking for, even in times of solitude. My mind decides to wander off, for he has an imagination of his own, displaying moments of us alone. We would run through the meadows, letting our young spirits run free, enjoying the wonders of nature, listening to the birds that sing. So this is starting to, there's some places where you can see definite, sort of entry points where, you could, tell a scene, paint a picture, and let us enter it. And so those are the opportunities. Anyway, letting our young spirits run free, enjoying the wonders of nature, listening to the birds that sing. We would watch bees collect yellow powder from the fields filled with colorful flowers. We then saw a building over the hilltop, so we managed to climb it to reach the rooftop. So one thing I should say too, we had this nice rhyme that sort of spontaneously popped in up above, and we sort of have a bunch of forced rhymes moving ourselves in. I think I would try to I would get rid of the rhyme in this poem because the rhyme is pushing the poem in a way where it's got too much control. So Winston Munn says, "What kind of bird?" And that's the kind of thing. Like we want specific details to see what kind of bird. We would watch the bees collect yellow powder. Now that's a nice little detail, and I think that works. And I expand on that. Like let us see that a little more clearly and in more detail. We rest under the orange sky, reminiscing the fun times we've had together. Then the night rises above the horizon, a truly a wonderful scenery. Though this being a dream, you by my side is all I long for. No matter where we are, no matter if it's real or not, spending time with you makes my dreams come true. Yeah. So what are the things in this poem where a specific story could flower out of? So look for those spots. I think the children playing, like you described that more, the bees, you could jump in there and really, yeah. All right. Well, anyway, that's going to wrap it up. So this is the critique of the week once again. This is usually the case. That's how submissions go. So thanks for sharing these. It's always really interesting to look at. Hope this is helpful. That's always the hope and the goal of the critique of the week. And the show don't tell is the main point for today, because there's so many times where you saw a great vivid poem that really showed details in a way that sparked our imaginations. And if you don't have details like that, we don't get lost in the poem. That's the overarching theme for today that spontaneously emerged, as it often does, because that's really the main thing that happens with poetry. So anyway, that is it for this week. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate all the comments. Love hanging out with you. Now, this week's guest in the Rattlecast. Let me turn this on first. Next week's guest in the Rattlecast, or this week. I guess I should say this week from now on, because it's just this Sunday. We moved it to Sundays. Wonderful poet this Sunday, Richard Garcia, is here. Richard's a great, among other things, he's just a really fun and imaginative poet. Speaking of, tangible, concrete details and letting our imagination roam, Richard Garcia is wonderful at doing that, especially in prose poems. It's probably the form he's best known for. Great poet, looking forward to talking to him. His most recent book is Porridge. We published him in Rattle many times. The prompt for this week was to... let me see. I don't remember. The prompt for this week was to write an ekphrastic poem about your favorite painting. So pick your favorite painting and write an ekphrastic poem about that. I should say, too, I'll turn this on for a second, that if the Poetry Space to drop, we have a really wonderful episode of the Poetry Space, which is what Katie Dozier produces. It's audio only. You can find it on iTunes. Just type in the Poetry Space, or Spotify or Amazon Music or whatever. And we had an episode that we just released today about ekphrastic poetry. And we had Elizabeth McMoon Tatango, who has won the ekphrastic challenge. I think we've had the ekphrastic challenge for 10 years. So that's 120 winners. No, 240, I guess, because there are 2 every 10 years, 2 each month. Yeah, 240 winners. She's won 6 times out of the 240. The leaderboard and all of that. So we talk to her. We talk about ekphrastic poetry. Read some great ones. Compare some, Auden and William Carlos Williams talking about the same poem. A lot of fun stuff in that episode. Learn more about ekphrastic poetry as you participate in the ekphrastic challenge by watching that episode on iTunes or Spotify. But anyway, next week's guest in the Rattlecast once again is going to be, that was last week's. Next week's guest is going to be Richard Garcia. Sunday, April 28th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.